Over the past 10 months or so, Joe Abercrombie has rocketed to the top of my favorite authors list. His characters are rich, his world is diverse and deceptively deep, his voice is one of the strongest in all of fiction right now. He so precariously balances crushing stories and world with just like outstanding humor. Like I would struggle to find an author who is as funny as Joe Abercrombie. That is what makes him as an author and First Law as a series so special. They don't sacrifice what's like good and lighthearted about life for what's terrible about life. First Law is grimdark definitionally, but there's so much levity at times, even in the most fucked up situations, characters are allowed to point at it and laugh, or point at themselves and laugh, and that's what makes it so endearing and so easy to read. So with the original First Law trilogy, we got a handful of just like fantastic characters who are experiencing this dark world from very different and very harsh perspectives. Logan, Glocta, Jazal, West, Pharaoh, and Dogman all work so well as guides into Joe Abercrombie's world. They're simple, right? They're pretty simple characters somewhat. They're almost archetypical, but they're just so totally likable, even the ones that are just awful. The story, for the most part, is really difficult to predict, so you're mostly here for them. You want to see what they're going to get up to, what's going to happen to them. This leads to a story ending that, while I really, really enjoyed it and thought it was really smart in a lot of ways and earned, it feels somewhat secondary to the specific endings of the POV characters, right? That was what I was more concerned about. I'd argue the same is true with the 3 spin-off books. You're there to see how the characters progress, rather than how the story progresses. Especially when it's like made totally clear that the actual goals themselves are more of a misdirection, whether that be tonally, metaphorically, or just like a literal misdirection. This was not really a perspective I had until I'd read the Age of Madness trilogy. Before starting these, I'd read that Joe Abercrombie had actually written each book in the trilogy before publishing the first. He wanted to have like a more clear idea of where things were headed, like how it was going to end, so he could go back and restructure the first draft and make foreshadowing work better and characterization work better. And I can definitely see why he did that. Just kind of some of the ways that the first trilogy ended, you could just kind of slightly tell that that was not totally set in stone from the start. So this like total plan that he had from start to finish works really fucking well, in my opinion. From the very start, kind of unlike First Law, you really get this sense that the story has a goal. And not just like literally a goal, but you know that the story itself is trying to get somewhere in the outline. And you know that it has a plan to do that. So it makes it's more satisfying to see how it's going to get to this ending that Joe Abercrombie has in mind. You especially get that because it immediately starts off with a bunch of fucking prophecies. That's just kind of what happens when you have a fortune-telling witch as one of the main povs. She gives such strong foreshadowing that you're kind of like peering at every shadow and wondering what it means or if it has anything to do with the prophecy. That's why I always really like prophecies in any fiction, because it's just so fascinating to see how they work, whether they can be changed or whether they're going to end up in predictable ways. It's interesting, and that's what makes theorizing about these stories so fun sometimes. I find that because of this, Age of Madness is way more about its world and themes and story specifically than its characters, which is like the exact opposite of First Law. While I really loved each of the POV characters for their own reasons, they never really had the same oomph as any of the original ones. They don't really stick out as much to me. They're unique and funny and engaging POV characters, and like by the standards of fantasy in total, they're fantastic. But compared to Abercrombie and his other POV characters, it's hard competition. That is a tough win. Like, they're just not really going to stick up to Jazal, Logan, or Glocta for me. And maybe that's because they did it first, but I think it's more because the story moves at like an insane pace, which is awesome. I think that's what differentiates this trilogy so much from other Abercrombie books. But that does mean that there is a sacrifice of some of, you don't really slow and smell the flowers that often. The characters are kind of just going through the story that's happening around them and making choices and doing all this stuff, but it's way more about their actions rather than their development. I found myself way more concerned about what was going to happen next in the world than what was going to happen to specific characters, where like First Law I was constantly really scared for each of the characters. In this, I was kind of only scared for Orso, because I fucking love Orso. Case in point, when I saw POV characters from the first trilogy in these ones, I got really excited. But I don't really see that being the case as much in a following trilogy. I would be like, oh, great, I could get to see how they're continuing, but in this I was like, fuck, like I'm so glad I get to see them again. As I said though, what they're giving up in characterization is made up for with how fast the story moves. It's studying themes like privilege, wealth disparity, control, and freedom all just so quickly and so concisely, and it's so focused on them that I think it does it like as well as it possibly could. Lots of great politics, which is interesting because there was some politics in the first trilogy, but there was such a world. There was a world to build, right? But in this, all of the lore is pretty much in front of us, so it's just politics a lot of the time, which is fine. I thought it was really cool. Action is great as always. Of course, Joe Abercrombie nails it every time. Always makes really engaging, constant, bloody, brutal, fun action. But I will say, I've had enough of battles in the North. I'm done. There has been like one in all but 2 books, pretty much, and I'm done with Northern politics playing out the same way. And that's kind of the point, is that it's a never-ending cycle, but that doesn't necessarily have to be on page. You know, that I was kind of getting weary of that by the end. Try not to get too spoilery. The story itself was so wonderfully told with such a clear direction, yet a lot of the time I was still caught by complete surprise. You know, like, even though you're like, oh, they've just won and the book's about to end, they'll still hit you with some crazy twist that just, you know, you're clawing to read the next book after that. And that's always super impressive, to have a clear direction yet still make wild twists that don't feel unnatural or fuck up the pacing or anything. It's very cool. Anyway, even though this trilogy wasn't exactly what I was expecting, that does not make it worse than First Law by any means. It's just different. I expected this to be First Law, but better, but it's really First Law, but like wider, right? I think people who have read all the other books will see what I'm getting at, and people who haven't really should get fucking reading, because this shit's great. This is 9 books deep, and it's still a fucking 9.3.